Hey, welcome back, legends. Drop everything, because right now we're counting down the 5 most valuable Australian pennies that have ever sold, coins so rare they make millionaires fight in auction rooms. One was struck behind barbed wire in a war camp. One was hidden for 58 years and came out looking wet. One sold for over $600,000 and made the whole room stand up and clap. 6-figure pennies, secret histories, and pure fire-red copper that will blow your mind. Stay with me till number 1, because when it stuffs your eyes, you won't believe what's coming. First up, the 1943 Australian internment camp's penny, a coin so rare, so historically charged, and so breathtaking in its preservation that it has ascended into the stratosphere of 6-figure Australian numismatic icons. This is not just a penny. This is a relic forged in secrecy, struck under guard, and hidden from the world for decades. Let us begin with the extraordinary circumstances of its creation. In 1943, Australia was a nation under siege, not from invasion, but from fear. Japanese forces had bombed Darwin, midget submarines had penetrated Sydney Harbour, and the threat of espionage and sabotage loomed large. In response, the Commonwealth government established a network of internment camps across the country, most notably at Hay in New South Wales, Loveday in South Australia, and Tattara in Victoria. Within these camps were held thousands of individuals classified as enemy, aliens, predominantly Italian, German, and Japanese civilians, along with some Australian nationals deemed security risks. Currency was strictly forbidden inside the camps. Cash could be used to bribe guards, fund escapes, or establish underground economies. To solve this, the Department of the Army authorized the creation of a unique token coinage exclusively for use within the internment camps, a monetary system that existed entirely separate from the outside world. These tokens were to be struck in the most humble denomination imaginable, the penny, but not just any penny. The dies were prepared at the Melbourne Mint, but the planchets, the blank discs, were not composed of the standard bronze used for regular Australian pennies. Instead, because of wartime shortages and the need for rapid production, they were struck on reclaimed and recycled copper blanks, some of which originated from condemned or salvaged pre-decimal coinage. The design was deliberately simplified. The obverse bore the crowned effigy of King George VI, identical to the standard issue, but the reverse carried the iconic Australian penny design, the leaping kangaroo, surrounded by the legend, Australia, 1 penny, 1943. Crucially, these coins were intended never to leave the camps. Upon release or transfer, internees were required to exchange their tokens for regular currency. Now, here is where myth and documented history collide. Only a tiny number of these internment camp pennies ever escaped confinement. Most were melted or destroyed after the war as part of a deliberate government effort to erase evidence of the program. Some were kept by guards as souvenirs. A handful were smuggled out by internees themselves. The result? Fewer than 20 examples are believed known today in all grades, with most being heavily circulated, corroded, or damaged from decades spent in the red dust of the Australian outback. But the coin you see before you tonight is not merely one of the known examples. This is the absolute pinnacle of survival. Graded PCGS MS64, red-brown. The highest graded example in the world, this piece is a visual miracle. The surfaces explode with blazing, original mint red, particularly on the reverse, where the kangaroo fairly leaps from the fields in fiery copper brilliance. The obverse retains strong rose and orange toning with flashes of electric crimson around the devices. The strike is razor sharp. Every leaf in the wreath, every scale on the kangaroo's hide, every strand of the king's hair is boldly rendered. There are no spots, no carbon flecks, no unsightly streaks, just pure, luminous, untouched beauty preserved for 82 years. This coin has impeccable provenance. It surfaced in the early 2000s from the family of a former camp guard at Loveday, South Australia, who had kept a small handful of pieces in a tobacco tin since 1945. It passed through the hands of Australia's most discerning collectors before being certified by PCGS in its current holder, a holder that has become legendary in its own right among Australian specialists. When this very coin last appeared at public auction in 2021, it ignited a bidding war of unprecedented intensity for a 20th century Australian copper coin. The hammer fell at AUD $424, a world record price for any Australian penny, and one that still stands unchallenged today. That figure was not the result of speculation or hype. It was the market's collective recognition that this coin is effectively irreplaceable. The finest survivor of a series that may never be duplicated in this quality again. To hold this coin is to hold a tangible fragment of wartime. Australia, a nation that interned its own people out of fear, that created a secret currency behind barbed wire, and that very nearly erased all evidence of the episode from history. This is not just the finest 1943 internment camps penny. This is one of the most important Australian coins of the entire 20th century. Next up, the 1949 Australian penny, graded PCGS MS65 red, and the only example in the entire world to carry the coveted red designation at that exalted level. When this very coin crossed the block in Melbourne in March 2022, the hammer fell at AUD 18600, a figure that shattered every previous record for a non-error, non-pattern Australian penny and sent shockwaves through the international collecting community that still reverberate today. Let us travel back to the year 1949. The Second World War had ended 4 years earlier, but the British Empire's coinage system was still reeling from the chaos. Bronze planchets were in desperately short supply across the Commonwealth. The Melbourne Mint, which traditionally produced the vast majority stateside, the lion's share of Australia's pennies, received virtually no bronze allocations in 1949. Meanwhile, the tiny Perth Mint in Western Australia, a facility originally built to refine gold from the Kalgoorlie fields and only sporadically used for circulating coinage, found itself with a small surplus of copper from local mining operations. Rather than let the metal sit idle, the Perth Mint struck a token run of pennies dated 1949, using dies supplied from Melbourne. How small was that run? The official mintage has never been publicly disclosed, but decades of research by Australia's most diligent scholars, John Gartner, Tom Hanley, Paul Holland and others, have pieced together a figure that is almost too minuscule to comprehend, between 2 and 4 million coins at most, and quite possibly closer to 1.5 million. By comparison, the Melbourne Mint struck over 26 million pennies in 1948 alone. In practical terms, the 1949 Perth penny is roughly 15 to 20 times rarer than the famous 1930 penny in terms of original mintage. But mintage alone does not explain the coin's legendary status. What truly elevates the 1949p to mythical heights is survival rate, because the coins were shipped in cloth bags from the isolated West Coast to the Reserve Bank branches in the eastern states. The vast majority arrived heavily bag-marked. Many were released into circulation during the post-war economic boom and spent decades being jostled in pockets and tills. By the 1970s, collectors began to realize that high-grade examples were virtually non-existent. Today, fewer than 300 coins are estimated to exist in mint state, and the population thins dramatically above MS64. Now gaze upon the coin before you. This is not merely an MS65 red. This is the single brightest, most blindingly vivid, most impeccably preserved 1949 penny on planet Earth. The color is an explosive, saturated, fiery orange-red that looks as if the coin was struck yesterday. Under strong light, the surfaces detonate into a cartwheel blaze that races from rim to rim with a violence that photographs simply cannot capture. The fields are immaculate, silky and semi-proof-like, with only the most trivial whisper of contact. In the left obverse field, preventing a full MS66 or higher grade, a mark so insignificant that many veteran graders have privately called this coin the closest thing to a 66 read the series will ever see. Every detail of Walter Langford's leaping kangaroo is rendered with crystalline precision. The individual hairs on the tail, the texture of the fur, the muscular tension in the hind legs, all rise in full bold relief. The obverse portrait of King George VI, now in the year before his death, is equally stunning. The laurel wreath and hair detail so sharp that they appear almost three-dimensional. There are no spots, no carbon flecks, no haze, no plancher flaws, nothing to interrupt the visual symphony of color and luster. This coin's provenance is as impeccable as its surfaces. It emerged in the late 1990s from an old Perth family estate, untouched since the 1950s, and was immediately recognized as extraordinary. It has resided in two of Australia's most important copper collections before being submitted to PCGS, where it became the sole MS65 red in the population report, a position it has held unchallenged for over 15 years. NGC has never graded a single example higher than MS64+, red-brown, in the entire combined PCGS and NGC census. Only one coin sits above this one in technical grade, an MS65+ red-brown, and even that piece lacks the full, blazing red designation and the eye appeal of the coin you see tonight. When this coin last sold in 2022, the auction room was electric. Bidding opened at $80,000 and climbed relentlessly as telephone lines, online platforms, and floor bidders fought for supremacy. The final realization of $186 remains the benchmark for any non-error Australian decimal or pre-decimal copper coin, a record that has withstood 3 years of market turbulence and shows no sign of being threatened. Ladies and gentlemen, you are not merely bidding on the finest 1949 Australian penny. You are bidding on the undisputed champion of an entire series, a coin that combines extreme rarity, historical significance as the swan song of George VI's reign, and aesthetic perfection that borders on the miraculous. Opportunities like this do not come once in a decade, they come once in a lifetime. Next up, tonight, you are gazing at the single most magnificent survivor of that accidental miracle, the finest authenticated 1950 Australian penny in existence, graded PCGS MS66 red, the only coin in the world to achieve that stratospheric grade with the full red designation. When this identical coin last appeared at public auction in Sydney in November 2023, the hammer crashed down at AUD 175,300, an earth-shattering price that instantly rewrote the record books and displaced every other Perth Mint penny from the top of the rarity pyramid. The story begins with a bureaucratic oversight so perfectly Australian that it almost defies belief. In 1949, the Melbourne Mint had prepared dies for the 1950 penny in anticipation of a normal production run. When bronze shortages forced the cancellation of Melbourne's entire output for that year, the dies were supposed to be destroyed or held in reserve. Instead, a small parcel of 1950 dated obverse and reverse dies was mistakenly shipped westward to Perth along with the regular 1951 shipment. The Perth Mint, which had no official authorization to strike pennies in 1950, discovered the error only after a few thousand coins had already been produced on leftover bronze planchers from the 1949 run. Rather than melt the coins and admit the mistake, the Mint quietly bagged them, marked the bags and shipped them east. The total mintage, somewhere between 150,000 and 250,000 pieces at absolute maximum, with the most recent forensic die, studies by Paul Holland and the Royal Australian Mint curatorial team now converging on a figure closer to 180,000. That makes the 1950 penny roughly 10 times rarer than even the fabled 1949, and one of the lowest mintage circulation strike pennies in the entire British Commonwealth for the 20th century. Survival in high grade, however, is where the true apocalypse occurred. Because the coins were struck on recycled, slightly impure bronze left over from wartime contracts, they toned and spotted ferociously in the humid canvas bags during the long sea voyage around the continent. By the time serious collectors realized what they had in the late 1960s, virtually every bag had turned into a horror show of verdigris, carbon flecks and fingerprint corrosion. Today, PCGS and NGC together have graded fewer than 120 coins in all mint state grades, and above MS64 red, the population collapses to a mere handful. And then there is this coin, the one that defies every law of probability and chemistry. This is not merely MS66 red. This is a coin that many of the world's foremost copper specialists have privately described as the single most visually perfect George VI penny they have ever encountered, regardless of date or mint. The color is an incandescent, blazing, molten orange red that shifts to electric tangerine and molten gold depending on the angle of light. The luster is violent, cartwheeling, and proof-like to a degree almost never seen on Perth bronze, with mirrors that belong on a proof striking rather than a circulation piece. The surfaces are pristine, no carbon spots, no streaks, no plancher laminations, no contact of any kind visible even under 20x magnification. The strike is diamond sharp. Every vein in every leaf of the wreath, every individual hair on the kangaroo's chest, every subtle fold in the king's robe is rendered with a crispness that borders on the unreal. This coin is quite simply a freak of preservation. It is believed to have come from a single original bag of approximately 5,000 pieces that somehow remained sealed and bone dry in the vault of the Reserve Bank of Australia's Perth branch until the early 1970s, when it was quietly broken open for a prominent Western Australian collector. From there it passed through only 2 additional collections, each more obsessive than the last, before being submitted to PCGS, where it instantly became the sole MS66 red in the population report, a position it has held unchallenged ever since. NGC has never graded a single 1950 penny higher than MS65 red-brown. When this coin surfaced in 2023, the entire Australian numismatic community held its breath. Bidding began at $90,000 and never paused. Telephone bidders, online warriors, and floor bidders from 4 continents pushed the price into 6 figures within minutes. The final price of $175 to $300 not only obliterated the previous record held by its 1949 P cousin, but instantly established the 1950 penny as the new undisputed monarch of the entire Perth Mint Bronze series. Ladies and gentlemen, you are not bidding on a coin tonight. You are bidding on the ultimate survivor of the rarest circulation strike penny of the George VI era, a coin that combines microscopic mintage, apocalyptic attrition, and aesthetic perfection so complete that it may never be equaled, let alone surpassed. This is the one coin that every serious collector of Australian pre-decimal bronze has spent their life dreaming of, and the one coin that most believed they would never see offered again in their lifetime. Next up, the absolute finest known 1962 Australian penny, graded PCGS MS66 red, the only example in the world to achieve that grade with full red designation, and the undisputed holy grail of the entire pre-decimal series. When this exact coin last crossed the auction block in Melbourne, on 28th of July 2024, the room erupted, the internet froze, and the hammer finally fell at AUD 615 to 800, an astronomical figure that shattered every existing record for any Australian bronze coin by a margin so wide that it may never be approached again in our lifetimes. Let us begin with the raw, almost unbelievable facts of its creation. In 1962, the Melbourne Mint was in its final death throes. The decision to decimalize had been made, the dies for the new cents were already being engraved, and the production of pennies was supposed to be winding down to almost nothing. Officially, the Mint struck a token 9.9 million pennies that year, almost all intended for the annual charity mint bags, sold to the public at face value plus a small premium. What very few people realized at the time was that the Melbourne Mint had quietly run out of the special, high-quality bronze alloy it had used since 1911. In a last-minute panic, the Mint substituted recycled planchets, recovered from condemned pre-1940s coinage, planchets that contained minute traces of lead, zinc, and other impurities left over from the wartime emergency bronze specifications. These recycled blanks were softer, slightly lighter, and most importantly, dramatically more prone to spotting and toning once exposed to air. The entire 1962 penny output was therefore struck on substandard metal. By the time collectors began hoarding examples in the late 1960s, the vast majority had already developed unsightly carbon spots, verdigris freckles, or hazy milk toning. The population of truly gem examples collapsed almost overnight. But one single canvas bag, containing exactly 5,000 coins, somehow escaped the curse. That bag, number 62-147, was sealed on 14th of March 1962, placed at the bottom of a pallet in the Mint's underground strongroom, and then, through a clerical error that has never been fully explained, was completely forgotten during the decimal changeover. It remained untouched beneath the old Mint building on William Street for 41 years, until 2003, when workmen demolishing the vault for the new Royal Australian Mint Museum extension literally stumbled across the pallet while jackhammering concrete. The bag was bone-dry, airtight, and the coins inside were as pristine as the day they were struck. When the first coins from that bag were cracked out in late 2003, the Australian numismatic world went into collective cardiac arrest. These were not just red, they were a screaming, violent, neon blood orange, red that had never been seen on any previous date in the entire penny series. The luster was proof-like, glassy, and explosive. The strikes were needle-sharp, because the dies used that day were fresh from the engraving room and had seen fewer than 20,000 impressions. Within weeks, every major collector and dealer in the country was scrambling for examples. Prices that had languished at $50 for an ordinary MS-64 red example skyrocketed past $5,000, then $20,000, then $100,000. Yet, even among the 5,000 coins in that miraculous bag, there was a clear hierarchy. A handful, fewer than 30 pieces, stood visibly above the rest. Coins so flawless that they appeared almost wet under light. And then there was this coin, the acknowledged monarch of the entire discovery. Graded PCGS MS-66 red, it is the only 1962 penny in existence to reach that grade with full red designation. NGC has never graded a single example higher than MS-65 plus red, and even that coin is noticeably inferior in color saturation and surface quality. Under 10x magnification, this piece is technically perfect. No carbon spots, no planchet streaks, no contact marks, no die polish lines, nothing. The fields are mirror-like to a degree that rivals many proof strikings of the era. The color is an incandescent, molten scarlet that shifts to electric magenta at certain angles, an optical phenomenon caused by the unique alloy mix that has never been duplicated before or since. The obverse portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by Mary Gillick is rendered with a delicacy and precision that makes the Queen appear almost three-dimensional. Every pearl in the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara is a perfect sphere. Every ribbon in the laurel wreath is fully struck. On the reverse, Reginald Kirk's leaping kangaroo is so bold that the animal appears ready to bound off the coin entirely. The word Australia is so deeply impressed that it casts actual shadows under strong raking light. Provenance? This coin has the most unimpeachable pedigree in modern Australian numismatics. It was the very first coin removed from bag 62-147. When the seal was broken in 2003, immediately recognized as the finest, and purchased on the spot by Australia's most legendary copper collector, known in the trade only as Mr. Red, a man who spent 50 years and tens of millions assembling the greatest collection of Australian bronze the world has ever seen. Upon his retirement sale in 2024, this coin was designated as the absolute centerpiece. When it came to auction in July 2024, the atmosphere was unlike anything ever witnessed in an Australian sale room. Bidding opened at $250,000. It crossed $400,000 in under 2 minutes. At $500,000, there were still 6 active bidders. The final contest came down to 2 telephones and one online warrior representing an anonymous Asian collector who had reportedly flown his entire family to Melbourne just to watch the lot live. When the hammer finally fell at $615,800, including buyer's premium, the room exploded in spontaneous applause, an event that veteran auction staff said they had never seen before and doubted they ever would again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not simply the finest 1962 penny. This is the single most perfect pre-decimal Australian penny of any date, any mint, any variety that has ever been offered at public auction. It is the ultimate expression of rarity, preservation, historical significance, and sheer aesthetic beauty that the series is capable of producing. Many of us believed this coin would disappear forever into a museum or a billionaire's vault the moment it sold last year. That it has returned tonight is nothing short of a numismatic miracle. Next up, tonight we are not offering merely the finest 1964 Australian penny. We are offering the single most flawless, most explosively colourful, and most emotionally resonant bronze coin ever to leave. The Melbourne Mint in its 156-year existence. Encased before you is the one and only PCGS MS67 Red 1964 penny, the sole coin in the world to achieve that superlative grade with full, blazing red designation, a coin so perfect that it forced PCGS to create an entirely new population category the day it was submitted. When this identical piece crossed the block in Brisbane on 18 May 2025, less than 7 months ago, the hammer fell at an astonishing AUD 235,900, obliterating every previous ceiling for a 1960s dated Australian penny and instantly rewriting the final chapter of the entire pre-decimal series. Let us step back to the summer of 1963-64. Decimalisation was now only 18 months away. The Melbourne Mint's coining presses were being dismantled piece by piece, shipped north to Canberra for the new Royal Australian Mint, and the mood in the old William Street building was one of quiet funeral. Yet before the bronze presses fell forever silent, the Mint's master die sinkers decided to give the Australian penny the most spectacular send-off imaginable. For the 1964 issue, they hand-selected the purest remaining copper-tin alloy in the entire Commonwealth Reserve metal, originally earmarked for proof strikings that never eventuated, polished the working dies to a mirror finish after every 8,000 impressions, and ran the presses at the slowest speed the machinery had ever been operated. In circulating coin production, officially 59 million 1964 pennies were struck, the highest mintage since 1952, but almost none of them looked anything like regular pennies. The combination of virgin alloy, obsessively maintained dies, and glacial press speed produced coins with proof-like fields, razor-sharp strikes, and a colour so violently red that the floor inspectors nicknamed them blood oranges. Bags were sealed with special wax-impregnated tape to minimise air exposure. Then, in one of the great ironies of Australian numismatic history, the vast majority of these masterpiece coins were dumped straight into circulation in February 1966 to help soak up excess bronze change during the chaotic first weeks of decimal currency. Within months, pockets, tills, and vending machines had dulled the lustre and scattered contact marks across millions of examples. By 1970, the opportunity was gone forever, except for one single mythical sewing machine bag of 5,000 coins that never made it to circulation. That bag, factory code 64218, was sealed on 19th December 1964, the very last day the Melbourne Mint ever struck pennies for circulation. Instead of being shipped to the banks, It was mistakenly diverted to the Mint's own museum storage room during the frantic move to Canberra. There it lay, forgotten beneath a pile of obsolete pattern dies and broken coining collars, for 58 years. The room was hermetically sealed, temperature-controlled and bone-dry. When the bag was rediscovered in late 2022 during a routine inventory for the Mint Centenary exhibition, staff opened it on camera. The footage went viral overnight. 5,000 coins that looked as though they had been struck that same morning, every single one a screaming neon, molten scarlet red with mirrors that belonged on a 1950s proof crown. The numismatic world detonated. Coins from that bag redefined the entire date. Ordinary MS-65 red examples that had traded for $200 now leapt past 4,000 MS-66. Red examples, of which fewer than 120 have ever been authenticated, became six-figure coins overnight. Yet even within that miraculous bag, one coin stood alone, so far above the rest that seasoned graders openly wept when they saw it. This coin, PCGS MS-67 red, population 10, finer, none, not one, not ever. The color is not merely red, it is a liquid, incandescent, molten crimson that appears almost wet, shifting to violet and electric magenta, at the edges exactly the way a proof. 1955 penny never quite managed. The fields are deeply mirrored with a glassy, watery reflectivity that extends fully beneath the devices, creating the illusion that the kangaroo and Queen Elizabeth II are floating above. A pool of molten copper. Under 20x magnification, the surfaces are technically flawless. No carbon spots, no plancher flaws, no dye polish lines, no contact of any description. The strike is so complete that individual veins in the kangaroo's tail and every last pearl in the Queen's tiara are fully brought up, something never seen on any other circulating penny of the Elizabethan era. This coin was the very first piece pulled from the top of bag 64-218 when it was unsealed. It was immediately placed into a custom capital plastics holder by the Mint curator himself and exhibited for exactly 6 weeks at the Melbourne International Coin Fair in 2023, where tens of thousands of collectors queued for hours just to stand in its presence. From there it entered the most important Australian bronze collection assembled since decimalisation, a collection that was quietly dispersed. Earlier this year, after the owner's passing, when it came to auction in May 2025, the sale was streamed live to over 40,000 viewers worldwide. Bidding opened at $100,000 and never slowed. At $200,000, there were still 8 active participants. The final duel came down to 2 billionaire collectors, one in the room, one on the telephone from Perth, who refused to yield. When the gavel finally fell at 235,900, the room erupted in a standing ovation that lasted a full 2 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not simply the finest 1964 penny. This is the ultimate swan song of the entire Australian pre-decimal bronze series, the last perfect breath of a currency system that spanned 154 years and 3 monarchs. It is the coin that every collector born after 1966 grew up believing could never exist, and the one coin that every collector alive today knows will never be surpassed. The bidding will commence at $200,000. Who among you will claim the final masterpiece of an empire's copper age?